Do you remember the McCloskeys? Patricia and Mark McCloskey. So remember these two? This happened back in June 2020, and this happened in St. Louis, Missouri. We have Mark and Patricia McCloskey. Kim Gardner was the prosecutor, and I've got other videos on this channel talking about some of the conduct of this prosecutor and how insane it was. But here we are. We've got the McCloskeys. Their case is still going forward. And this week we learned some additional things. We learned some interesting stuff, in particular, not about the McCloskeys, but more about the prosecutors, more about the people who were charging the McCloskeys with the crimes. What happened after this whole ordeal? Do you remember? Let me do a quick refresh on the McCloskeys. McCloskeys are ultra wealthy. They have a huge mansion, and they are living in St. Louis, Missouri, and the BLM protests are going on. They're marching down their street. The McCloskeys live in a private residence, so their house is gated, and the BLM protesters, or the protesters, maybe they were Antifa, who knows anymore at this point, but they broke through the private gate. We had pictures. We covered this at length on this show, and we saw that they broke the gate down, and they basically marched up onto the McCloskeys' private property. The McCloskeys grabbed these firearms, as you can see here. They grabbed some weapons, and they decided that they were going to be protecting their property, as, in my opinion, was 100% their right. And they had every right to do this, but for some reason, the prosecutors came and they charged them with crimes for brandishing firearms and for all sorts of ridiculous nonsense. So they brought those charges, and now what we're talking about is, what were the prosecutors doing? What were they thinking at that time? I was always concerned about that. We reviewed many of Kim Gardner's, who is the head prosecutor there, statements and some of the actions she was doing, and it didn't make any sense to me, but fortunately, we do know a little bit more about them. So this story comes from KMOV4, and we see here this story was published yesterday on September 15, 2020, written by Lauren Trager. It says, the McCloskey case, a rare look at prosecutors' emails, reveals improper urgencies to charge, the attorney says. News 4 received a series of emails, text messages, and a voicemail exchanged in the days leading up to Mark and Patricia McCloskey being charged. Okay, so that sounds interesting. What does the article say? It says, for the first time, News 4 is getting a rare look at what went on behind the closed doors in the days leading up to the charges being filed against them through an anonymous source. News 4 received a series of emails, text messages, and a voicemail exchanged in the days and weeks leading up to Mark and Patricia McCloskey being charged for what happened in their home in West Central End. In a voicemail. So we're going to have a couple different people who are exchanging this information back and forth in a voicemail. The St. Louis Police Sergeant, Detective Curtis Bergdorf, which is an amazing name, Curtis, and the Assistant Circuit Attorney and Chief Warrant Officer, Chris Hinckley, they're communicating back and forth. And the Circuit Attorney is a prosecutor. That is somebody who presumably is working with the prosecutor's office, and they're communicating with the St. Louis Police Sergeant and the detective to decide what to do with this case. Should we charge these people or not? What's the deal? So the prosecutor calls over to the detective and says, Curtis, you need to call me back. I wrote a long email to you trying to ask a bunch of questions about what you said. Some of it was expletive. And so I don't know what expletive that could have been. There's a couple that come to mind, like the F1, or some of it was S, that was just, you can fill that in with what you think is most appropriate. But now we need to straighten this out, he says, because I am done with this crap, Hinckley said. So this is a prosecutor responding over to the detective, who is the lead investigator. The next sentence says, Bergdorf is the lead investigator on what happened at One Portland Place on June 28th. Since then, prosecutors have charged the McCloskeys with exhibiting weapons, and 9 people have been issued citations for trespassing on private property, which is news to me, right? For the longest time, when I was reviewing this case and all the news articles were coming out and Kim Gardner was making her public statements and everybody was sort of trying to beat up on the McCloskeys, everybody was saying that these were peaceful protesters and they weren't doing anything wrong. And they were just, peacefully walking through the gates, and the gates were open, even though we had pictures of the gates being smashed. And the McCloskeys were ridiculous. They had no reason to fear for their safety or for their well-being, because these were peaceful protesters and they were doing nothing wrong. Well, we fast forward and now we learn 9 people have been issued citations for trespassing on private property, which I don't know how it works in St. Louis, but in Arizona, trespassing on private property is a crime, meaning you broke the law, which is essentially the same thing that we've been saying from the very beginning. So if 9 people broke the law, they were trespassing literally on private property. What the hell are they charging the McCloskeys for? Why would they even be charged with a crime? There were people, 9 of them, by the government's own admission, who trespassed onto their property. And so they grabbed their firearms to protect their property against a mob who was chanting and breaking down gates and who then also broke the law. So Kim Gardner decided that they were going to charge him with crimes. Again, I have no idea what is going on with that prosecutor, but here we are. The article goes on. It says that the Hinckley got heated over the probable cause statement. He outlined outlining the charges against the McCloskey. So Bergdorf, who is the detective, created a list of 14 reservations about how Hinckley had written it, claiming they weren't factual, including the use of the term assault rifle. So the detective Bergdorf said that was a propaganda term, which I think he's right on that one. Hinckley responded, "I'm more than willing to remove the term, but in alleging I'm using propaganda, you've crossed the line. If anything, your changes, conduct, and unexplainable edit in the PC, which is the probable cause statement, strongly hint of bias or agenda." So you see these two guys are sort of going at each other to try to figure out what to put in this probable cause statement, and they're trying to sort out what to do with this case, probably because they both know this is nonsense, and they're trying to manufacture a basis for criminal charges against the McCloskeys, and they're getting frustrated doing it, rightfully so. And so on the McCloskeys case, we see here that the St. Louis police declined to comment because the case is pending in court, and in fact, the case is still with the grand jury, with the McCloskeys' next court appearance in October. And so this is interesting. The McCloskeys are very affluent. They've got a lot of resources. I know Mark is an attorney. I think Patricia may also be an attorney. So they're very well plugged into this. They know how to handle these cases extremely well. And as they were going through this entire ordeal, I'm sure they had that. They knew that. They knew that they were going to be okay and that they had the resources to fight this thing off. But many people don't. Many people don't live in mansions. Many people don't, have the ability to just, hire high-powered lawyers to handle this thing. There's a news story going around I saw just very briefly today about supposedly another Trump supporter who was arrested out of his own home. He was in his home for brandishing a weapon. There was some BLM or some Antifa protesters who were outside of his house, and he was brandishing a firearm. And so I'm going to definitely dive into that story when we know a little bit more, but this sort of resembles that. This is a situation where if you are a person without the means and without the skill set to represent yourself in a case like this, you can absolutely get steamrolled. The McCloskeys are certainly not getting steamrolled. If we look over, we can see from the court records that they have filed a number of different motions, and they're working very hard to disqualify the prosecutor's office. And I think they've got a pretty good case on this. So the McCloskeys have filed what's called a motion to disqualify. They're filing a supplemental motion to disqualify the circuit attorney, Kimberly Gardner, and the entire circuit attorney's office. They've got multiple exhibits, and they're filing that with the court. And it was filed by their attorney on behalf of Mark McCloskey. We've got additional motions being filed, memorandum. We've got all sorts of stuff. And their next court date is going to be on October 6th. But what they're doing is being very aggressive. It sounds like the case is still with the grand jury. So it sounds like they haven't even been indicted yet. And so I'm not real sure what that court proceeding is going to be, if it's a status conference or whatever it is. We can't actually see the title of that down here. We can see it's with Commissioner Michael Colonna, Division 25, but that's about it. We don't know what that hearing is going to be, but the McCloskeys are trying to disqualify Kimberly Gardner. They're trying to get rid of the entire prosecutor's office, and they may have a decent basis for it. Some of the article says that Kimberly Gardner was actually using the McCloskey case in fundraising campaigns and to generate money for her campaign, and that obviously would be a major problem. Can't prosecute somebody and then use them to raise funds for yourself. I mean, that's such a massive conflict of interest. That would just lead you to go prosecute people only for the purpose of generating revenue for your reelection campaign. Obviously, that would be a huge no-no. And so The prosecutor's office, they're going to respond back and they're going to say, nope, none of that should happen. And, we should stay on the case. There's nothing unethical about this, but it's difficult to know what Kimberly Gardner is saying or what her position is when there's really very little, she's not willing to give any public statements about any of this stuff. So we'll have to wait until the courts sort it out, and they will. So we'll continue to follow this one along because we are seeing this very subtle encroachment on a lot of our, on the Second Amendment, on the ability to protect yourself, the rules around self-defense, the ability to use a firearm to protect your home, to protect your property, to protect your livelihood. And this assault kind of just continues on.